Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you won't believe what possibilities we have as a people. We have the talent, we have the skills, we have the whole thing, but we are missing a program. We're missing the leadership. We're missing the sense of purpose. And without the sense of purpose and with the resources, we are not going to be empowered. And the sense of mission is of key importance to bringing about power. And that sense of mission, though, has not been established by our leadership. And since it has not, it has placed us in danger. Let's look at this cry for leadership among our people, because our people see something here. 40 years after the United States Supreme Court outlawed segregation of the races in America's schools, supposedly in the interest of providing equal education through racial integration, the majority of black students find themselves in hyper-segregated urban ghetto schools, entrapped in an educational system that is in severe crisis and imminent danger of total collapse. We've had an experiment, ladies and gentlemen. The Supreme Court decision has been made. The busing has taken place. The surrounding of schools and shipping our students out has taken place. What is the condition of our people today? Hyper-segregated in the midst of in the midst of our urban ghettos. So the issue Du Bois raised early in this whole organizational career was what? What are you going to do about the people who are not in white schools? What are you going to do about the fact that the people are not integrated? Are they then to be made to sit around and wait for this great millennial era when all people shall be living together, black boys and white girls and all that other kind of stuff? Or must we see about the needs of our people right now? 40 years after blacks in Montgomery, Alabama won the right to ride in the front of the bus, blacks in urban America are virtually the only ones, along with other forlorn minorities, riding the buses. I tell you, the white man gives you what you want with the vengeance. He tells you, you say you want to ride in the front? Good, I'll give you the whole bus. And so now you're the only one riding it. You got the front, the back, and the sides all to yourself. He's got his own express buses and other means of getting into the city. This is 40 years of, what is this now, 55? It's now near 95. So the issue of riding in front of the bus has not been solved in the way you thought it would be, did it? 30 years after gaining the right to vote, having benefited from the passage of the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act of 1964-65, blacks in urban America, you see, can vote for black politicians who cannot improve their plight, and can vote for the President of the United States. The only problem being that the big cities where blacks predominate are no longer important as the suburbs in electing the president. In other words, so you see, before we became majorities in the United States, it was the big cities and the big city mayors and so forth that determined the presidential candidates and determined who would be president. As soon as you got the vote, the strength of the vote now is in the suburbs. And presidents now can be elected on suburban white votes. And therefore, the presidential candidates need no longer pay much attention to urban black votes, which is one of the reasons why then both Democrats and Republicans run hard during their campaigns against black people and the interests of black people. The only way they can maintain office and gain office is by running against black images, against Willie Hortons, against so-called crime and the other things, because that's the way they're going to get white suburban votes, people who are not even really being threatened by black crime, because it is black people in black cities who are the major victims of black-on-black violence. However, that violence is used to frighten white folk in electing presidents and other national and state officers. 20 years after passing the fair housing legislation, blacks are hyper-segregated in urban ghettos and in suburban neighborhoods. Worse still, many blacks are homeless, sleeping on the sidewalks, on the bridges, and in abandoned buildings. If you would read this month's Emerge magazine, based on an article based on a very interesting book called Apartheid USA, you would read a startling statement that says a black family that earns $50,000 has less choices of where it will live and how it would live than a Hispanic who earns $2,500. So where's your fair housing? What has it gained you? Blacks are more segregated today than we were in 1920 and in 1940. The whole movement of the demographics of America is to isolate black people totally in the urban ghettos and in the suburbs as well. And yet you brag about your fair housing laws. Yes, look at the reality of the situation. Look at the organizations that led these kind of campaigns. Look at the leadership that told us that these kinds of legislation would rescue us and make us hold hands with little black boys and little black girls. Where are we today? And what are our circumstances? 20 years after passing this law, we are in more trouble than ever. After 25 years of affirmative action, blacks find themselves kicked out of corporate America, find themselves with the highest unemployment rates, drifting into poverty ever more rapidly, while other ethnic groups gain employment ever more swiftly. And we find ourselves begging for handouts on the streets of America. If you read a detailed analysis in the Wall Street Journal last week, 2 full pages and a full column saying what? Losing ground. Blacks, the only group that suffered a total loss of employment during the recession. This is your affirmative action for you. Blacks who were 10, 15% of the working staffs of many corporations suffered 20, 30, 40, almost 50% of the cuts in jobs. During 90 and 91, when 60,000 blacks lost their jobs in American corporations, 60,000 Asians moved into jobs in American corporations. 55,000 Hispanics moved into jobs in American corporations. Where is your people of color? Where are these people every time they stand up? They say black and Latino. And yet we don't hear a word coming the other way. Yes, the white man gives you what you want with a vengeance. He says, you want it, I'll give it to you. You want affirmative action, we'll make everybody a minority. We'll bring the white women in on it. We'll bring all the other ethnics in on it. We'll lay a game on you called diversity in the workplace, and you'll fall for it. And then they will say, well, since we've got to hire all these other groups, we have to cut back on the number of people that we hire from you. Now, you can't object to us hiring Hispanics and Asians, can you? The most interesting thing about this situation, ladies and gentlemen, is that while we are flowing out of American corporations and black blue-collar workers are suffering great losses, with other ethnic groups gaining, this is at the very point where some 60 black people, distinguished Negro leaders, sit on nearly 170 corporate boards. Yes. People such as Vernon Jordan sits on 10 and earns $500,000 a year for just having his name on the boards. Okay? Did you read the piece last week? He's Clinton's favorite guy. Yeah. When Clinton wants to have fun, he calls Vernon. They play golf and go on the yacht together, and you know, and he runs interference for Clinton, and, you know, they're just good old buddies. Even his law firm says, we didn't hire Jordan for his legal talents. They just said it out front. His role is to play golf and play around. Yes, he wouldn't take an offer to be Attorney General because he could have more clout sitting in the position that he's in. And the other civil rights organizations are wondering, say, Vernon, when are you going to give us a break? When are you going to act in the interests of black folk? He said, but I'm out of the civil rights game now. So isn't it a paradox then, that at the very point where we are being kicked out of America's corporations, we have blacks sitting on America's corporate boards. Some sitting on 5 and 6 and as many as 10. Is that the reason perhaps we don't hear about the losses that we are suffering? Is the situation one that by appointing these token Negroes to these boards, we will no longer complain, or they have had their mouths shut so that they no longer complain about our not being there, ladies and gentlemen? This is the result of affirmative action, the result of assimilationist program. 25 years after the initiation of black capitalism, blacks find their communities' markets dominated by aliens. Black business persons find they can't do business in America nor with America. After 40 years of being America's moral conscience, as a lot of Negroes like to brag about, blacks find their communities being devastated by immorality. After preaching brotherly love and race-transcending love, they find themselves to be the most hated of races. For blacks in America, 30 years after having the ringing words, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last, America has become even more of a prison, sealing their bodies, hopes, and aspirations in the dungeons of despair. For African Americans all over, for African Americans, all the promises of the civil rights era have been betrayed. Everything has been reversed. The more black elected officials have been elected, the worse off the black electorate has become. Yes. Black homelessness became a national scandal when a black man was appointed Secretary of Housing. The black community was overrun with AIDS, drugs, addiction, TB, and all sorts of diseases and maladies when a black man was appointed Secretary of Health. Black nations were overrun by the imperial armies of the United States when a black man was head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The more black judges appointed to the bench, the more black men became police commissioners and police officers, the more black men filled America's prisons. And black-on-black violence ravaged America's black ghettos. Let's look at it. The Honorable Supreme Court Justice, late Justice Thurgood Marshall, achieved greater victories in the United States Supreme Court as a lawyer than he did as a judge sitting on his bench. In fact, he sat on the bench and sadly witnessed his life's work being ravaged and savaged by a mean-spirited bench. As a black man assumed to become Secretary of Commerce, blacks as an ethnic group are the least ones engaged in what? Commerce, at home and abroad. In 1993, at the appointment of a black woman as Surgeon General and ardent advocate of sex education and the dispensing of condoms, black teenage pregnancy and female-headed families threaten the very foundations of the black family and culture and the viability of the black community. This is the legacy of the leadership that we have confronted, ladies and gentlemen. And we must look at this situation and under whose leadership and what leadership this occurred. It occurred under the leadership of what I call the assimilationist, moralist leadership establishment. Those people who told us that our salvation lay in assimilating with other folk. We look at this shame as we see more black mayors elected. The deterioration of the black community hastened. Let's look quickly at the federal contributions to certain large cities in America. In 1977, let's look at the amount that the federal government contributed to city budgets. And let's compare that with what they received from the federal government in 1985, periods during which black mayors were presiding over some of America's cities. In 1977, New York City's budget, 19% of it was gotten from the federal government. By 85, it was only 9%. Los Angeles started with 18%. By 85, it was 2%. Chicago, 27% in 77, 15% in 85. Philadelphia, 20% in 77, 8% in 85. Detroit, 23%, now in 85, 12%. Baltimore, 20%, 85, 6%. Pittsburgh, 24%, 85, 13%. Boston, 13%, in 85, 7%. Cleveland, 33%, in 85, 19%. Minneapolis, 21%, in 85, 9%. So are the black mayors bringing in the money? Are the elected officials bringing in the money? As a matter of fact, what you have going on here, ladies and gentlemen, is a war against black cities. You have the federal government itself engaging in the provocation of black populations to riot, so that under the cover of bringing law and order, they may impose martial law on those populations and destroy those populations. This is the kind of game that hides itself behind a bourgeois leadership. I wanted to tell you the other evening when I was over at Brother Roy's about bourgeois radio. We didn't have time. You have to recognize one thing, you see. When we talk about the media in America, we look at who owns the media. You see, and we note that this media is owned by about 10 corporations that own about 80% of the media. Few companies owning over 200 cable companies and so forth. And you see the struggle now over who's going to own the cable operations, who's going to control communications in America. And we recognize then that those who own the media, because what? A free press only belongs to the person who what? Owns one. Okay? That obviously if the bourgeois element in America and the ruling elite in America owns the media, then the media will be used by that class to carry out its programs and its ideologies. And it will use the media to try to brainwash and falsify the consciousness of African people. But while we look at that, we must look at the ownership of our own media. Yes. And see what class of people own that media. Then you can solve the puzzle as to why that media is always preaching to you about voting. As if voting was the only source of power in America. Because those people that own those stations achieve their social position and power through America's electoral system. That's why it's important to them. Because the class of people that own those stations and control those stations got their position through what? Electioneering and by being attached to the Democratic Party. And one thing that a bourgeois leadership and a leadership elite tries to do is to convince the masses that the masses can have their interests satisfied by satisfying the bourgeois' interests. And therefore, when they get elected to office, or they get high appointed office, they tell you, ain't we progressing? Doesn't that mean an advancement for black folk? When they are the only one who have advanced, and you don't have a new nickel in your pocket as a result of their being in this position. And so they want to make you think that their elections and their ability to wheedle out of the Democratic parties and the Republican parties money that advance their economic interests represents an advancement for you. And therefore they fail to give you a true education as to what politics is really about in America. And power in America is not in voting. You have to understand that. Why? If you'd even review your own history, you would recognize that what you call your most significant victories were gained before you gained the right to vote in 1964 and 1965. Did you vote to get the vote?
All right. Absolutely not. All right.
Huh? Recognize what you're going on here. But someone will tell you that there's no other way. But what did we say? Power in America is based in America's corporations. Is determined by those who own the means of production and who own property. Power and property ownership go together in America. No property-less people, no people who own no productive businesses are in power in America. I don't care what kind of votes they have. And recognize this, that where the power is, you cannot vote them out of power. Because those who run America's multinational corporations and run America's institutions don't run for office. They tell the people in office what to do. And therefore, if you are to wield real power in America, you must own the sources of power. And those sources mean the ownership of productive facilities and the ownership of property. And the control of major institutions and the ability to weld yourself together as a people and to control your consumption and to control your behavior in ways that you can exert your influence upon this system. But yet we get a medium that tells people, vote, vote, go out and vote. And you're going to suffer all the more as a result thereof. Yes, you got to face the reality. You got to know where it's going. Power lies in strategy. It lies in technique. It lies in alignment. You see. Why were blacks before they got to vote able to change the South? Through voting? Through alignments, through alliances, through control of their consumer rights. As you said time and time again, that to a great extent the civil rights movement was a consumer movement. It was a situation where blacks refused to spend their money in particular ways and in particular places. And by withdrawing their consumption, they were able to change the South before a single law was passed in their favor. Just the ability of black people to line up side by side and shoulder to shoulder and to march in one straight line changed the face of the South. So what does it say? Just the ability to sit in front of a door and not permit other people to pass is power. The ability to chain yourself down is power, ladies and gentlemen. Ultimately, it means that power arrives out of cooperation, out of alignment, out of strategy, and out of technique, and out of a sense of purpose and mission, and out of the ability to withdraw support. By voting in this system of domination in a way you legitimate your own domination as a people. And you have to watch it. Let's learn where power is. And that's what we're going to be talking about in Blueprint for Black Power. Where is it? We have this NAACP, this assimilationist, moralist leadership that sees the solution of black problems as involving the assimilating with people. But I just got to telling you that blacks are now more segregated than ever. So if our power depends on assimilation, we're in deep trouble. Yes. We have some group of preachers who try to tell you that the major problem in America is moral. Yes, that's why I call them moralists. That these people are stereotyped or some kind of way. And if we get them understand, you see the little silly ads on TV, you know, stop the hate. As if this was going to change something. As if the problem is hate. If the problem is they have a wrong knowledge of who you are. Come on. Yes. That the problem is one of morals. And therefore what we got to do is convert these white people to their own religion. And we got to make them true believers in their own constitution. And that way we will be free. You're out of your mind. Every revolution has had to deal with the issue of whether you should struggle for abstract rights or struggle for a right to meet the basic needs of the people.
That's right. That's right.
This was the issue that Booker was working with too. He was weighing that issue. Is the voting the really primary thing, getting black people to vote, getting civil rights the primary thing, or should we see about feeding the people first, building an economic base, and then moving into the civil rights and voting thing? When we look at the history of other immigrant groups and ethnic groups, we've seen them almost be silent on the issue of voting and civil rights and so forth, as they moved into the black communities and other communities and established an economic base. And then after getting an economic base, using that base as a political tool. You see now the vendors are being swept from the streets of Brooklyn, and they're being swept from the streets of Harlem on black folks' money. You sat up here and you supported these Koreans. You didn't see color when you spent your money. You wouldn't let somebody else tell you how to spend my money. And they paid you back. You talked about multiculturalism, and yet not a one of you is in partnership with a Korean. Not one of you is in partnership with an Arab. Not one of you is in partnership with white folk. Where are the multicultural businesses? Where are the multicultural economic situations? What are you talking about, multiculturalism? Where is it? They laid it on you. And yet in Blueprint for Black Power, I talk very straightforwardly about the Korean organizations. I named the presidents. We're calling names here, ladies and gentlemen. And they are called the Korean Producers Association, the Korean Grocers Association, the Koreans of Greater New York Association, not Multicultural Association, not Multicultural Grocers Association. No, Korean grocers, Korean producers. You understand? But we are the people of color. They're even buying your politicians. A month or two ago, they took a group of these Negroes from the Black Caucus to Korea. Wined them and dined them. Presented seminars about race harmony to them. So your own legislative people will become their cogs and will be used by them to operate against your very interest because you are colorblind and you wanted to assimilate. In the New York Times, they told you up front, and we quote the dates and the places in Blueprint for Black Power. They stated very clearly, now we got the money. We want to now deal with politics. And they say that we are going to present each mayoral candidate with 3 demands. Did you read it? And what are those 3 demands, they said? We want now to have a terminal market, a cooperative market that belongs to us as Koreans, so that they can control both the what? Wholesale and what? Retail end of the deal. We're not going to even buy from the whites out there in the Bronx terminal market. That's what we want. And we're going to vote for mayors, and we're going to fund their campaign based on whether they can meet this demand. The second demand, we want these mayors to keep out these big vendors like Pathmark and the others because they compete against our small businesses. And therefore, we want the zoning laws maintained so that they will not be admitted, so that they can compete against us. This is what people do. They gain power and they use power. You understand? And they gain the important base first. You see? Then their third demand was what? We want the mayor to crack down on what? Vendors. And to sweep the vendors off of the sidewalks. Okay? And you're beginning to see the effects of it. In fact, within about 13 days after they made this demand, Dinkins expanded the vendor squad, bringing in new vans and new personnel and so forth, and stated very clearly that it's not such a great problem to remove the vendors because they have no political constituency. So what are we saying? What are we saying here? So now we got the right to vote, and our vendors are being swept off the street. We got the right to vote, and we are hungry and homeless in the street. We got the right to vote, and now we are jobless and underemployed and unemployed. We got the right to vote, and we're sitting in schools with asbestos and lead and poor teaching facilities. So now you got the abstract rights and the civil rights. But in what way has it really given you a right to be a real human being in America? Cruz summarized this in his critique of this assimilationist leadership. No one knows better than the political ruling class that the political, economic, and cultural policies that monitor the internal affairs of American society are not inspired by moral considerations, but are based on the imperatives of power, especially economic power. The conceptual linking of integration with civil rights effectively obscures that by eliminating discrimination in public accommodations, in voting rights and employment opportunities, neither ethnicity nor cultural diversity is therefore divested of any social meaning or function. The cultural pluralism remains operative. What is he saying here? He's saying that, okay, getting voting rights, getting rid of discrimination in public and private places does not remove people's sense of ethnic identity. In other words, they can still vote, or you can gain the vote, but they will still identify themselves what? Ethnically. They will still act what? Ethnically. There was somebody that tried to tell us that once we got the vote and once we integrated schools and so forth, that these people would lose their ethnic sense. But he's telling you that is not true. As a consequence of civil rights legislation, the dominant culture is still left free to thwart or otherwise limit the social range of integration of the minority group. But on the other hand, the elimination of legally enforced exclusion by reasons of race or ethnicity does in fact enhance the minority group's freedom and flexibility to develop the internal resources of its own political, economic, and cultural plurality. But what is the key is this. The Civil Rights Acts of 1964-65 outlawed the use of race as a basis for making decisions affecting individuals, not groups. It was an ill-conceived conclusion on the part of the civil rights leaders to expect that desegregation in the private and public sectors of an institutionalized economy would transform American society into a nation of desegregated hearts and minds. Let me put it this way. There are a lot of us who like to talk about this individualism. You know, people do what they want individually, and we are talking about individual freedom. And I ask you this question. If you believe so much in individuals and that individuals are so different and that individuals have different tastes and that individuals then will do their things in different ways, why is it that 180 million white individuals don't do business with you? Why is it that 8 million, 7 million Asian individuals free to act on their own individual impulses don't do business with you? You would think if they were so individually different, if they had such individually different tastes, they would interact with you and there would be true integration. But somehow these individuals seem to think pretty much alike when it comes to us as people. Every other group of individual peoples somehow seem to think alike in dealing with black folk. So it says then, you can have individual freedoms, but you can still act like an ethnic group and still use your ethnic identity as a basis for power. And therefore, gaining abstract individual rights in no way means that other people will not continue to act as groups and to use their group as a means of dominating other groups and moving other groups forward. But we forgot that lesson. And so now, as a result of the assimilationist leadership, we find ourselves with all of these abstract rights, and yet it is ashes in our mouths. And we have some other group here called neoconservatives, which I cannot discuss tonight. It really doesn't deserve the term leadership group at all, but it's getting great exposure because it is in line with the crypto-racist white conservatives. They are funded by the white conservatives. They are funded by the white foundations. We discuss in Blueprint for Black Power the power of foundations and of think tanks. You see, we have a dim view as black people of intellectuals. And I must tell you, nothing is more practical than an intellectual theory, ladies and gentlemen. Concepts are the most concrete means of power that you can find. And somehow somebody has convinced us that thinking conceptually is a non-African mode of thought. Somebody comes telling us that we are a non-linear people, that we are spiritual and intuitive, and that thinking logically and thinking analytically and thinking conceptually is somehow the property of white folk. God gave you two sides to your doggone brain. And one brain in one side is for intuition, one side is for holistic thinking, one side is for spiritual thinking. Yes, but you got another side. That's that left side that is the side of logic, that is the side that uses symbols, that is the side that uses analysis. God gave you two sides. He gave you a logical side and an intuitive side. Don't let any joker tell you that your only role is to be intuitive and to be people who can only estimate and approximate. How can you look at the great pyramids of Egypt and the great mathematics and then turn around and say that you are only a spiritual and intuitive people? You've got to be crazy. Let me tell you, and this is one of the problems I want to talk about when I talk about nationalists. Be careful that in your effort to separate yourself from white folk, you don't wrap white stereotypes in kente cloth. Okay? And this is happening to a lot of us. The same stereotypes that these people have laid on us, that we can't think straight, we can't think logically, we are emotionally oriented, we are overrun by spiritualism and spiritism, that we like to guess, that we don't know the real and true answer. This is the same game that whites been laying on us. Then we get some guys who want to come in and says, this is naturally African, and now we feel all right about it. Get out of here. We got some people telling us, you know, that we are an oral people, and we are an oral people. But they want to make us think that oral communications is the only means by which we as African people should communicate with one another. You got to be out of your mind in a day and age of electronic communications and computers and so forth to lean on an antiquated methods of oral presentation. It is no way I can deliver here in this oral presentation the kind of information that can be delivered in a book.
All right.
And therefore, you must become a book-reading people. You must become a people who can analyze words. You must become a people with a vast vocabulary. You must become a people who can process the highest words and the most difficult words rapidly, because these are the people who are opposing you and who intend to bring your life to an end. Be careful. Let me tell you quickly what these institutions will do for you. You think they're just collections of intellectuals thinking, right? Forget it. Let's look at what the Ford Foundation did here when they decided to transform the nature of social science and the way social science research was done. And they decided they would recreate the whole nature of scientific research, social science research in the universities. They created what they call a foreign area fellowship program. And they financed it. They granted over $23 million to researchers. You see, the elite doesn't play around. When they want to change the nature of things, they fund those things. They build institutions and think tanks and the whole bit. And we lay all of this out in Blueprint for Black Power. That's why you got to have think tanks. That's why you got to have a whole set of institutions. You see, that's why your goal must be, as our goal is in the African World Info Systems, to write all of the books that are being read in the Black Studies programs. That's what you got to do. As this next generation of black students move through the universities, there's got to be your nationalistic books and your nationalistic perspectives and your African-centered perspectives that they study from. They must crowd out any other point of view in the university. It must be African-centered professors, educated in African-centered institutions that sit as the chairpersons of the departments. That's why I tell people I'm not writing for the current generation, I'm writing for the next one. So when those students move through the Black Studies programs and the other studies programs, and they read Black on Black Violence, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children, The Falsification of African Consciousness, Understanding Black Adolescent Male Power, Violence, Blueprint for Black Power, Educating Black Children for the 21st Century, they will have a conceptual orientation toward the world such that they will now move in the interest of African people and not against that interest. But if you're not publishing, if you're not putting the textbooks out, if you're not educating the professors, if you're not putting your people in the departments, if you're not making your teachers, if you're not placing them in the schools, then you cannot transform the opinions and orientations of your upcoming generations. And a people who have real power do these things, ladies and gentlemen. You must understand that. Now, these people decided then, now let's look at the statistics as a result of their funding this foreign area fellowship program. Statistics will demonstrate just how successful this program has been in strengthening American higher education. Strengthening. Of the 984 former fellows, you know, they call them fellows, you know, after you in postgraduate training, or you're a fellow at the Brookings Institute, or you're a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, you know, something like that. You sit there and you do research and you do postdoctoral work. And we talk about how this is done, how ultimately let me show you how these people end up. Okay? So they graduated 984. 550 hold faculty positions in 181 colleges and universities in 38 states. This is how you do it. Some 29 universities employed 5 or more fellows. 10 universities have employed 10 or more. In addition to academic and teaching careers, 82 former fellows are now in government service. You put your people in policy positions. 38 are now in philanthropic or nonprofit organizations, so they can tell the NAACP and the black conservatives what to do. 45 are in business or professions. Many former fellows have added to our knowledge of the non-Western world through the publications of the results of research. African-centered education is much larger than the teaching of African history and culture. Much larger. You must have a world knowledge and a knowledge of the world. You must have European experts as a part of your African-centered institutions. You must get to know intimately the cultures of other people and know their psychologies. You must get to know the real history of the world, for history is the best psychology text of all because it demonstrates the nature of human behavior, not the psychology books.
All right.
Must understand that. I had one young man who's so happy he's at NYU. He said, oh, I'm learning so much, and I'm so happy. I'm in this class in economics. You know, I said, well, now, why are you in that class? And they're doing all these circles and curves and, you know, cost and all these kind of figures, which Negroes think are magic signs for making money. You see, so they think if they learn all this voodoo, that they're going to come out and be like the white folk. But remind that professor that the American economy is not ultimately based on the management skills of American management. It's not based on the organization of American corporations. What ultimately is it based on? Upon the murdering of Indians and the stealing of their lands. So that the economic course essentially is a course in how the booty is going to be divided among American people.
That's right.
When you look at the real world, you note that people establish themselves economically first by taking over economic resources and viable resources. That's it. You study your own history. How did the Empire of Mali come into being? How did Ghana come into being? How did Songhai come into being? Struggles over what? Gold and salt, and who won, and over trade routes and other things, and people went to war and took those things from one and another, and those who gained control over them then built empires and nations and so forth as a basis of that. Not just studying economics 101 and business administration. But you got to learn real history. You got to learn a history that goes beyond just the celebration of African heroes and the celebration of African culture. You got to learn how it's really done in the world. So these people now, many former fellows have added to our knowledge of the non-Western world through the publications of the results of research. Altogether, they have published some 373 books, over 3,000 articles and short monographs. Moreover, they have edited or contributed to another 516 volumes. This is how you change minds. What is going on with Henry Louis Gates? What is going on with Cornel West? Who says that black leaders, serious black leaders, must be race transcending? How the hell are you going to be a serious black leader and be race transcending? You know, but that's the dilemma of the assimilationists. They want race and not race at the same time. They want to organize black people based on blackness so that they can get rid of blackness. They want to use your black interests, your black feelings, and your black identity to advance their program so they can tell you later that blackness does not matter, that color has nothing to do with it. We are better off when we don't even refer to ourselves as black.